Now, let's talk to Mr. Tony Agwans, researcher, senior lecturer, Anglo-Ruskin University in London, joining us virtually from the UK. Good morning. It's good to have you. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Olumide. And how is Lagos this morning?
Well, very well, and we expect even better as the day progresses. Now, all roads lead to Lithuania for the NATO summit. The heavyweights are going to be there. Joe Biden is already in the UK, France, Germany, and the other NATO leaders. Their objective is quite clear: show support for Ukraine and do it in as pragmatic a way as possible, I expect, without letting Ukraine join until after the war. What are your thoughts as these countries gather?
Yeah, absolutely. You have put it very succinctly, Olumide. The NATO meeting, NATO summit coming up, beginning tomorrow in Vilnius in Lithuania is perhaps one of the most anticipated NATO summit in recent time. And for obvious reasons, because of the ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine, which has just crossed the 500 days mark. Okay, so everyone is expectant. There's a lot of anxiety, within several countries that make up the NATO alliance. Unfortunately, like you have alluded to, Ukraine is not a member yet, and they cannot even be a member while this crisis is on. So there's a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot of thought going on within the alliance as to what to do. A lot of the NATO alliance members are already reeling because this crisis, going close to 2 years now, they have all been supporting. And some of these things, they have their economic consequences. So everyone is asking for how long is this crisis going to go on. And then just a few days ago, the US, President Joe Biden, approved the supply of, cluster munitions, a bit rather reluctantly. I think his hand was forced. They don't really have a choice. So there's a lot going on, and the meeting starting tomorrow in Lithuania is going to stretch the unity of the NATO alliance. So we watch and see.
It's good that you bring up the supply of cluster munitions to Ukraine by the US, because now the Cambodian Prime Minister has weighed in and he's all but begged Ukraine not to use those munitions, because he's rightly pointed out that the munitions dropped in Cambodia in the 1970s are still being felt in Cambodia up till this present day. Thousands of people have lost their lives from the unexploded ordnances of these munitions, and he was actually appealing to the Ukrainian president not to use these weapons, because at the end of the day, the Ukrainians themselves will be the one bearing the short end of the stick. These munitions will fall in places where they will not be found or discovered, and for up to 100 years, they can remain unexploded and keep exploding as time goes by. So you said just now that he doesn't have a choice. Did he really not have a choice? That is President Biden?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, he did have a choice, but military experts, have looked at these cluster munitions that the U.S. is supplying to Ukraine. It has its pros and cons. If you ask me personally, I would say there is no point using it. But I'm not a military general, so I think the understanding is that the Ukrainians are not doing as well as the West and NATO as they thought. Even the counteroffensive has been rather slow. So it's a case of, standing between the devil and the deep Red Sea, as is often said. And also, they will just have to live with the consequences if Ukraine eventually use these cluster munitions. Like you have said, Cambodia, even in Afghanistan, when some of these things were used, we also saw the devastating consequences, almost like landmines, and they always, kind of destroy civilians, they kill civilians, especially children who play around. So it's a very tight corner for the Ukrainians. And the truth of the matter is that I personally don't think they should have used it, but we cannot really, put a finger on it to know exactly what is happening on the field there in Ukraine, because, like we all know, over 120 countries in the world, banned the use of these cluster munitions. And interestingly, it is only the US, Russia, and Ukraine that didn't sign that, convention or treaty. So I don't know how that one happened. So this is where we are. But let's hope that they eventually don't use it, because the after effect is going to be too much to handle.
Cambodia itself also is reported not to have signed that treaty on the ban on the use of cluster munitions. But let's stay with it for an instance. One of the NGOs that help to demine countries that have been inundated with these mines, of which Cambodia is one of them. It's been totally inundated with these mines, and the land has been corrupted. It's affected their agriculture, affected their housing, affected their waterways. It's affected all spheres of life, and the country can't really move forward without demining all these areas. Now, sometime in January, it was reported that Ukrainian officials left Ukraine and went to Cambodia to see how the Cambodians and how the agencies that were responsible were helping to demine Cambodia. So it seems to me that they've thought this through and they want to go ahead with the risk. But in your view, does the risk outweigh the reward?
I think you are right there. This is just the humanity in me speaking now. I don't think the risk is really worth it. But if you look at it, the Ukrainians have been asking the Americans for these cluster munitions for a very long time. They've been the one asking for it. But the US, President Joe Biden was reluctant to approve this equipment to them. But what I think that has made the US to do this, like I said earlier, is the fact that all may not be going well, on the ground with the Ukrainian push, against the Russians inside Ukraine. So it's a case of, let's take the last resort. So the truth of the matter is that people are being killed anyway. Even last night, some humanitarian workers were killed due to, a missile attack from Russia, in Kyiv. So the Ukrainians are saying that people are being killed, people are being killed. So we are ready to face the consequences of having these munitions in our land and around our space. So I don't think when you look at this scenario, it's really, really difficult to fathom what the long-term effect is going to be. But like I said, let's just hope that they eventually don't deploy them. It could just also be a military tactics, to send a message to the Russians that we are backing the Ukrainians. That may just be a message that the Americans are trying to send. If you look at the UK here, the UK Prime Minister is not even in support. A lot of countries in the West are not in support. So it is a very dicey moment for both the Ukrainians and the Americans who have approved these cluster munitions and bombs.
In the meantime, the Ukrainians have accused the Russians of using cluster munitions so far during this war, so it's good to keep that in mind. Now, let's turn to the NATO summit, and also we're going to have a retired military personnel in Nigeria who served in the U.S. Army in the course of this program today, so he'll perhaps give us a more militaristic point of view concerning the munitions deployment. But Mr. Agwins, to the NATO summit now, and on the sidelines of this meeting, obviously, or maybe even it'll be front and center, the bid of Sweden to join NATO. Turkey's going to be there, and Erdogan as well, we expect. Do you think that the other nations will be able to sway Turkey to not veto Sweden's application and ratify it in view of the fact that they are still accusing Sweden of harboring anti-Turkey elements in Stockholm?
Yeah, I think when you look at the body language of the Turkish president, he's just, trying to play the last card. He has his good reasons, for, not, assenting to the Swedish becoming part of the NATO alliance. But there's been a lot of diplomatic underwork going on out to this summit. I have the feeling that at the end of this summit, Sweden would most likely, on a scale, I would say 7 out of 10, Sweden will become the next member of the alliance. There's been a lot of, diplomatic discussion going on behind the scene. And I believe that Sweden will be part of NATO, hopefully after this meeting. I think they've met all the other criteria. And with this war in Ukraine, it shows that, countries can be attacked, by countries with bigger military strength, which Russia have done to Ukraine now. So, and you can see the cost to the world economy. So I believe that Turkey, they will relax their, their restriction. They will relax their, deference to, Sweden joining NATO.
Why do you? Yeah.
It will happen during this summit.
But why do you think Sweden is taking such a long time to quieten the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party? That's the PKK, the ones with whom Turkey have a grouse, and demonstrations are still going on there. If NATO membership is so important to Sweden and the Kurdistan Workers' Party is so offensive to the Turks, then why is Sweden not quietening them down so that they can get their membership ratified?
Yeah, Sweden has been doing their best to quieten the PKK. But, in a proper democracy like you have in the West, and Sweden inclusive, it's not always very easy to clamp down on free speech demonstrations. It's not easy because of all the legal frameworks, democratic practices and all that. So that has been the challenge before Sweden. But that notwithstanding, when you look at some of the benefits, like, Sweden is one of the developed countries among the Scandinavian nations. They will also bring a lot, of expertise, a lot of, economic assurance to the NATO alliance. So when you look at it, putting all this package together, like I said, Turkey will not have any other reason to keep, preventing Sweden from joining. And moreover, if you look at Turkey now, the president, Erdogan, he has just won re-election. So I believe he knows that he's got another 5-year term. So he's a bit more relaxed. And I believe Turkey will give their assent and Sweden will become part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, following this meeting in Lithuania.
And all eyes remain on that meeting as it unfolds. Thank you, Mr. Agwins. Mr. Tony Agwins, always a pleasure. Researcher, senior lecturer, Anglia-Ruskin University, London.
Thank you, Olumide. Have a great day.
You too.